Hey there, this is Connor with Unit21, here to talk to you about AML 101. So we're going to get into a little bit of background, and then I'll be walking you through a demo of the product and how you can actually apply it to your AML program. But first, before we get into anything about ourselves, really wanted to start by thinking about the problem. Over the past couple of years, we've seen a lot of fines, a lot of regulatory actions, we're in an ever evolving financial services landscape. Things are a lot more complicated than they were even a few years ago. And companies are getting a lot of fines. They're struggling to keep up with regulatory expectations. They're struggling to keep up with the ambitions of the institutions that they support. They're looking for new solutions that allow them to be more nimble, more dynamic, take more control of their programs. And that's where Unit 21 really steps in. A couple of the sort of highlight impacts that we've had for customers include things like helping them file their SARs much more quickly and efficiently, helping them reduce their overall investigation times, and reducing the false positive rate they get on their monitoring programs. And all of this means that your team gets a lot more of their time back to be more proactive in investigating your sort of more significant cases, or that you can get a little bit more, aggressive with different types of monitoring because you have the time and the energy to do more, and instead of just kind of keeping your head above water. Now, how do we do it? We do it with this flexible risk and compliance infrastructure that allows you to ingest all of your data, whether it's your transaction data coming out of your core, coming out of online banking platforms, coming directly out of your own data storage, can be data coming from third-party systems like KYC, device data, things like that. You can also pull in data from Unit21's fraud consortium and use all of that in writing, testing, iterating on a monitoring program that you have total control over. You have the ability to use things like our network analysis features to identify, fraud rings, money laundering rings that might be operating in your ecosystem. And then we have our case management solution, which has a lot of advanced process and workflow automation solutions to help you be as efficient as you possibly can be. So I'll start with what we call detection modeling. This is our solution for monitoring transactions and other suspicious behaviors. We've got three different categories of models down here that I'd like to explain before we get started. Live models are really self-explanatory. These are the rules that are actively running, flagging your customers. But then we have these two testing modes. Validating models refer to sort of discrete historical backtesting. You can create a configuration of a rule and execute it on existing data and get fairly immediate results that you can analyze in the platform. I'll show you an example of what this might look like a little bit further down the road. We also have what we call shadow models, which allows you to turn rules on in the background. They'll run continuously, just like a live model, except they're just going to produce data on what would have hypothetically been flagged. So these can be really, really useful, both validating and shadow models for testing, for your above the line, below the line, and generally for making sure that your program is defensible, but also that it's as efficient as possible and you're reducing your false positive rate so that your investigations team isn't drowning in false positive alerts. We also have a couple of different ways to build rules. We have our dynamic model builder, which, as the name would suggest, is sort of the most powerful of the three. We have our scenario models, which I like to refer to as Mad Libs for transaction monitoring. These are sort of the easiest to get started with. And then we have our real-time rules engine. I'm not going to talk a ton about that today since we tend to use that for fraud purposes, for transaction decisioning, but we'll have other folks covering that in other parts of this conference. So let's look at a couple examples. We have our layering scenario here, and this is one of those Mad Lib style rules where we might be looking for a money mule. And what we're going to do is create a rule where we're looking for, any customer who is, receiving some funds. In this case, we want to set the bar at about $2,000, and then is transferring or spending those funds. And we'll say we want this threshold to be at least 95% of the incoming funds over a 1 month period. And all of this is adjustable. So you could create multiple versions of this rule over different time periods, or we can even get into, filtering, what type of customers you're looking at. Is this, if you're banking business customers, are we looking at different segments? Or if you're looking at, individual customers, are we doing a good job of, risk rating them, whether that be with third-party data that we could incorporate, or would that be just a generic, risk score that we're incorporating and saying, we want to have a variation of this rule that targets our higher risk customers. Now, that's just one example. Another thing we might do that uses our dynamic rule builder is look for some structuring behavior. Now, this rule obviously looks a lot different. What we're doing here over on the left is calculating variables. They can be transaction variables. They can be variables based on action events, think logins, password changes, or they can be entity variables, so things that we're reading off of the customer profile. So in this case, I want to count the total number of transactions in one day. I also want to calculate the sum of those transactions in that day. And then I'm also going to count the number of transactions here that are between a certain dollar threshold. And what I'm looking for, in this case are, any instances where a particular customer has more than 5 transactions with an aggregate amount that is above $1,999, but below our CTR threshold of 10,000. So looking for those folks who are trying to break up transactions to be below our reporting thresholds. Now, another example we might look at could be for account takeovers. And this is something that could be applied in a fraud scenario, but can also be, really, really helpful from an anti-money laundering perspective, is trying to identify accounts that have been compromised. So what we might look for here would be suspicious logins. And, that could be based on, again, third-party risk score, or the login coming from a high-risk jurisdiction or from a known bad IP address. And so we're going to count the number of instances, in this case, in a 10-minute window, that we have a login event that meets at least one of these criteria. We're then also going to look for changes to account information. So we might be looking for a password change, or someone disabling MFA, or a change of address in that same 10-minute window, as well as an attempt to make an outgoing ACH transaction. One other type of thing that we could do is use these variables in writing functions. And this becomes really helpful when we want to look for something like unusual behavior, because we could do something like calculate the sum of transactions in a 1-day period, and then compare that to the sum of transactions from the prior 90 days. And so what I've done here is created a rule where we're comparing this against the 90-day average and saying, we want to know about any customer
who has a transaction volume in one day that is 5x greater than what we would expect. Now, as you can tell, there's a ton of flexibility in what you can do with this, and it's really, really easy for you to be able to adjust these thresholds or incorporate additional criteria. And so you have so much flexibility and control to create different types of rules. Now we obviously have some templates and some pre-existing rules documentation that we can help you with as you get started. But this will allow you to really take control of your monitoring program. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about testing, and I did want to show you what that looks like. So we could take a look at this and say, well, we like that rule, but we're not entirely sure how it's going to perform. And we could say, let's go back and test it on some data from, around this time last year. And I'm going to run this, and in a few moments, we're going to be able to see exactly what would have been flagged. So we'll see all of these alerts. We can see that we would have generated for alerts 98 transactions. And we'll even be able to see who specifically would have been flagged and which transactions would have landed them in your investigations queue. Once we've done this testing, we have an opportunity to delete this if it's just not useful. Now, hint, once a rule has been activated as a live model, you can no longer delete it, although you can archive them. Maybe my favorite is that we can duplicate them. So if we want to come back and say, well, I do like this, but I'd maybe like to change the threshold and see what would happen if we tried this with a slightly different configuration. Pretty easy to do that. We're going to evaluate this over the exact same set of data. And we'll see that our alert volume wouldn't have changed much, but we would have captured a few more transactions. Now, once we're ready, if we're happy with this particular configuration, we can go ahead and activate this either as a live rule where we can set a start time. This can be in the past or in the future if you like. Set an optional end time, and then we can specify the alert queue. Now, for you, this is probably going to go into our AML queue, but you have total control. These queues are just examples, so you can sort of create different queues as you wish and sort of build them to suit your own team structure. One last option here is the ability to deploy to shadow mode. So if we want to just keep testing this, we can go ahead and ship this to shadow mode. It'll have the same start and end time options, but we won't configure a queue because we aren't going to be generating any alerts. Now, one other thing that I wanted to talk to you about before we get into alerts and investigations is customer risk rating. So we do have a customer risk rating platform that gives you all of the same control over your risk rating process, where you can build a risk model and you can add different risk categories. And these could be, custom data as well. So you can include, whatever sort of like third-party risk data that you want into this. And you can then bring in different variables and assign each of those variables and corresponding values different weights. What we'll end up doing with this once you deploy a risk model is we will do a weighted sum average of all of these individual components to calculate an aggregate risk score for any of your customers. You do also have the ability, if there's any particular value that needs to just automatically default them into a high risk category, to configure that and do so. Now, once you deploy a risk model, you'll be able to configure the settings for what scores should correlate to low, medium, and high risk categories, and to validate that this is, sort of bucketing your users in, relatively reasonable, percentages. And then if you ever do need to make changes, all you have to do is just, sort of deactivate, create a new version, and activate a new risk model. The other nice thing you'll be able to do is use these risk tiers in building enhanced due diligence flows. So we could create a rule where we say we want to, review our high risk customers based on their latest risk score every 6 months. And this will automatically set up a process by which your high risk customers will have an alert created for them. But you can also set this, separately for your medium or your low risk customers, and maybe we have a longer window that we want to use between reviews of our lower risk customers. If somebody does move up or down a tier, that may trigger an immediate review so that you can do a manual assessment of that new score. Now that we've set up your whole monitoring program, we can get into the alert review. And now I'm sort of looking at this through the eyes of our demo investigator and taking a look at all of the alerts that are currently assigned to me. Now, I'm pretty overdue on all of these investigations, as you can see, but if I were, doing a better job of be able to sort of keep track of my due dates, what I have a few days on, what I might have a little bit more time on, can see what queue these are in, what rule triggered them, even the disposition and sub-disposition of these. And when I'm ready to pick up an investigation, I'll have all of these resources at my disposal. Up at the top, we have a summary of what transpired and the status of our investigation. I'll have the customer info at my disposal. We'll even have our AI Copilot able to do some summary analysis for the analyst to help them with their investigation. And then we'll have all of the sort of basic things you would expect: transaction analysis tools, maybe a checklist of the steps that you want them to take to complete this investigation. You might want them to review prior activity to see, other investigations related to this customer, prior alerts, prior cases, maybe even prior SARs. But this analyst doesn't have the ability to see those SARs, so they're not showing up here right now. We also have our network analysis feature, which is really useful in helping you to identify potentially suspicious links between customers. These two, for example, are both using the same social security number. Or we might have these two who are also have logged in from the same IP addresses. So this can be really helpful in sort of proactively identifying linked accounts, fraud rings, money laundering rings that you might want to investigate. You'll also have a section to, attach documents if you have negative news searches or subpoenas or anything else that you need to attach to the investigation. A section for your notes, a section for a narrative, sections for, action activity, and obviously a comprehensive audit trail. Now, when we're ready to go through the process, you'll be able to customize all of these workflow buttons to suit your own process. But just for the sake of example, I might decide I want to, escalate this and associate this with a related case. We already have quite a few. And, we're going to send this up to our L2 review queue for further review. Now, as myself here, I can then come in and pick up this investigation where we left off. Once I do this, I'll have all of the same resources, but might go through, a slightly different type of process at this stage. These checklists can be different for each of your queues. So, whether that's, a different process for initial review and level 2 review, or whether that's a different process for different types of investigations. It's totally up to you. From here, we'll, either create a new case, or maybe we want to attach this to an existing case. And then from our cases list, we can come in, and once we've completed this investigation, we can go ahead and create a SAR. Now, once we've created this SAR, this is going to auto-populate all of the information about the associated alerts, the associated customers, have the subject information in here, the suspicious activity information. You'll have some things that you need to fill out, but most of it should be pulled in automatically. Once you're ready for review, you can click here. It will help automate, pointing out anywhere that you have missing or misformatted information. And I'll jump over to one that I know is completed, where, once this is finalized, we'll be able to submit this for review, at which point, whoever is going to be filing this can claim the review and ultimately can submit this either as a distinct individual filing, or you can select multiple at once and bulk file them. Once they've been filed, we'll keep a record of all of your filings. So you'll have, a record of who created them, who reviewed them, when they were filed. We'll even, get back all of your BSA tracking, information. And you can set up alerting in the event that anything's ever rejected or needs to be amended. We've got a similar process with CTRs, where you'll be able to, from a CTR alert, create a CTR filing, and you'll then be able to bulk file, all of these by exporting a file that you can file with the Treasury. And then when you get the acknowledgement file back, you can load it into Unit21, and that'll update the statuses of all of your CTR filings. This has been a whirlwind tour of Unit21 for AML. Hopefully this has been helpful. And if you do have any additional questions, we'd obviously be happy to find some time to talk to you about your particular program.
Thank you for joining our demo showcase. There are 11 more Unit21 demos you can dive into while attending Fraud Fighters Virtual Summit today, so please do so. Alternatively, if you're ready to learn more about Unit21 from one of our fraud and AML practitioners, you can simply scan the QR code on the left and request a personalized demo. And last but not least, I'm excited to share that we are in the midst of data gathering for our 3rd annual State of Fraud and AML report. We're seeking to make this research the most informative findings yet, but we're unable to uncover and publish these insights without your contribution. Scan the QR code on the right to fill out the survey. It'll take no more than 10 minutes, and it'll uncover invaluable industry trends and insights so we can all better combat risk and compliance together. Thanks so much for contributing to our research.